Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining the latest entry in the Retirement and Inheritance webinar series from Unchained Capital. This one titled, Are Bitcoin IRAs Legal? I'm Connor Dolan. I'm a VP on our Client Solutions team, and I will be your host for the discussion today as we focus on a really interesting topic that I'm asked about all the time, which is taking a look at the current regulatory structure for IRAs and how that interacts with Bitcoin. Before we jump into the discussion today, a few quick housekeeping items. So this webinar will be available on replay on our YouTube channel. Typically, it takes about a week to get that turned around. So definitely make sure to check out our YouTube channel if you'd like to rewatch this session. If you'd like to see the other webinars and continuing education content that we put out, and certainly make sure to subscribe if you're interested in keeping up to date with our newest content. If you can't make this whole session, you can always set up time to speak with our team to answer any questions you may have regarding the Unchained IRA or our platform more broadly. There will be a link for the live audience that's going to pop up shortly that you can click on and set up time directly with us. For anyone watching on the replay, you can always visit unchained.com/IRA and you can set up time to speak with our team. Furthermore, you can actually download this presentation deck if you are visiting or if you are viewing the session live. In the top right corner, there's a little cloud icon that you can download. And additionally, a resource that I thought might be helpful, there's a really good blog post on this same subject titled, Are Bitcoin IRAs Sustainable? That my counterpart here actually wrote. We'll make sure to include that article in the chat here. And if you're visiting our blog posts, make sure to check out the other ones we have. Our team puts out a lot of great content. Of course, it's all free. It's focused on continuing education, and you can subscribe to our newsletter as well if you'd like to stay up to date with the content that our team is putting out. As always, for anyone that is joining live, we will be leaving time at the end here for Q&A at the end. And so in the bottom right corner of this webinar platform, there is a questions box. Please make sure to submit your questions to that question box, and at the end, we will answer those live. So with that, we can definitely jump into the discussion today. Now, I might be a slightly biased here as he helps lead the IRA team, and he also acts as head of legal for Unchained. But I don't know if there's a better person to be walking us through this topic today than our very own Jeff Vandrew, who is previously worked in law and now heads up our head of legal. And he also has a CPA, and he's commonly referred to in the space as the godfather of Bitcoin IRA. And that's a crown I think he wears well. Anyways, Jeff, good. How are you doing, sir? How are you doing today? Good to have you on.
You're too kind, man. It's great to be here. It is, in my world, a little bit chilly, and what that means where I live is it's about 65 degrees today. That's unseasonably cold for late October, but I'm doing all right.
Good. Well, I don't think you'll get too much sympathy from most of our office most of our audience. I know we have a lot of Minneapolis Bitcoiners that are fans of the company, so I think they would they'd have a problem with that. But great. Well, as always is the case when Jeff joins our webinars, I do expect this to be a really enlightening discussion today because, as I mentioned, this is a really hot topic for clients. I'm constantly asked by clients in so many words, are Bitcoin IRAs legal? Can I really do this? Doesn't the IRS have an issue with me having Bitcoin in an IRA? And even more specifically, in the case of the Unchained IRA, holding my own keys to that Bitcoin. Now, admittedly, the title of the webinar today is a bit of an attention grabber because the short answer is yes, Bitcoin IRAs are legal. But what we will get into over the course of the discussion today is an in-depth look as to how Bitcoin fits within the current regulatory structure for IRAs, as well as what it would take for that to change at some point in the future. So with that, let's take a look at the agenda for today. So as you can see, we're going to start our discussion talking about prohibited investments and prohibited transactions. Now, Jeff is going to get into this shortly, but in the US for IRAs, the regulatory structure that we follow is based on what's called a negative statute, which means it's more important to focus on what's not allowed versus what is. And so for those first two topics, we are going to walk through what is not allowed within an IRA and if Bitcoin qualifies in those buckets. Next, we will talk through custody and key control and what it means to be a custodian in the context of an IRA. We will then spend some time focusing on the Unchained IRA, which is a solution from Unchained Capital, which allows you to hold real Bitcoin in an IRA and actually control the keys to that Bitcoin. Jeff is going to wrap up with a quick summary on our discussion and kind of the main takeaways. And then, of course, at the end for our live audience, we will leave time at the end for Q&A. So with that, let's get right into it. Jeff, as I briefly mentioned here, the IRA regulatory landscape is a bit unique in the sense that it is a negative statute. I think even before we get into prohibited investments and transactions, maybe that's a good place to start. Do you mind just walking through what that means to be a negative statute and how that relates to the discussion today?
Sure, absolutely. So, as Connor said, the statutory regime for IRAs in the U.S. is a negative statute. And what that means is it does not say what types of investments are allowed. It doesn't give blessing or consent to holding specific things within an IRA. It takes the opposite approach. And by that, I mean it says what sorts of investment are not allowed. So we can broadly consider these prohibited investments. Those are found in a variety of different places in the Internal Revenue Code. For reference, there are countries where this goes the other way around. For instance, most notably for us here in the States, Canada does not have a negative statute with respect to their RRSPs, which are their version of IRAs. And that's why we can't offer this product north of the border, one of a few reasons. But in Canada, they have a positive statute, meaning they list out very specific things that you are allowed to invest in. So we're lucky here in the U.S. Bottom line here is that any investment that's not prohibited under the statute is therefore allowed. So types of investments that are prohibited, and these are found in various places in the Internal Revenue Code. But first is life insurance. It's usually not a problem for most people. People typically aren't trying to buy life insurance through an IRA. The one that comes up more frequently are collectibles. So a collectible would be any work of art, any rug or antique, any metal or gem, any stamp or coin, any alcoholic beverage, or any other tangible personal property specified by the Secretary. So the Secretary in the context of this statute means the Secretary of the Treasury. In that part F, sometimes Bitcoiners get worried about that there because it says, they see is any other property specified by the Secretary. So they start to worry that, could the Secretary just specify Bitcoin as being one of those types of property? But what saves us here is the statute says any other tangible personal property specified by the Secretary. Tangible personal property, that has a very, very specific legal meaning. That is property that you can reach out and touch and feel and typically move around. It excludes real property, meaning real estate doesn't fall in, but it also excludes intangible property. So Bitcoin is very clearly under the law intangible property. There's no physical Bitcoin that you can pick up and move around. It is an intangible. That is a little bit of a, when I say pick up and move around, it's a little bit of an oversimplification. Something that people tend to find interesting are physical US dollars are actually intangible property. Even though I can pick up and move a US dollar around, that piece of paper is not what gives it value, right? What actually gives it value is intangible. It's kind of funny for me to say this on a Bitcoin-related seminar, but it's the full faith and credit of the United States government that gives that piece of paper value. The paper itself would be tangible, but the actual dollars that it represents are intangible. So it just kind of gives you an idea of the difference. And all we really need to know, again, is Bitcoin's clearly intangible. So we're not going to get caught up there.
Got it. Yeah, that is really interesting. And, as we've kind of already led on to the audience, prohibited investments is only one part of this negative statute. prohibited transactions are a big part of it as well. And so I thought, the next section here, would love for you to just walk through the difference between the two and maybe some examples of what those prohibited transactions look like. And of course, once again, whether Bitcoin falls into the bucket here.
You got it. So the prohibited transactions are found in section 4975 of the Internal Revenue Code. So 4975, that's a really high number in Internal Revenue Code terms. And as a guy that's practiced in the code pretty much his whole life, I can tell you when the numbers get up that high, it means usually you're dealing with some weird or funky stuff. That's not legal advice, but it's something I can tell you from a lot of years of practice. So none of the good news for us here, though, is that none of the rules in the prohibited transaction rules are going to ban Bitcoin investments so long as the IRA doesn't enter into transactions with a related party and it's not used as collateral, basically. So there's a lot of different things you can dig into in that section 4975. It's not really that easy to read, but it's actually really easy to summarize at a high level. Even if you don't understand every single word that's in there, one thing, if you actually do take the time to read it, that you'll come away with immediately, even as someone who, let's say, is not a lawyer, is that if you're not dealing with transactions with a related party and you're not engaging in any kind of borrowing or extension of credit, you're generally going to be okay. And, the way that Bitcoin IRAs typically work, as long as you're not buying the Bitcoin that's going in that IRA from yourself or a family member, which typically you're not doing, you're going to be okay there. And as long as you're not trying to buy Bitcoin with leverage, you're typically going to be okay there. And with the Unchained IRA, we don't offer any kind of borrowing at all with IRA Bitcoin. So you're going to be safe in that situation. So an IRA, that's all it's doing is the real traditional buying and holding Bitcoin. And if that purchase is happening from an unrelated third party, you're going to be fine under 4975.
Got it. Yeah. So at Unchained Capital, we offer Bitcoin-backed loans as well. And so that's a common question as to, can I take out a Bitcoin-backed loan with my Unchained IRA? And that's a big part of the reason why the answer there is no. So moving on, custody is next up on the agenda. And I think it's really interesting for this discussion specifically and for Bitcoiners because custody has its own definition when it comes to Bitcoin, but almost a different definition entirely when it comes to IRAs and thinking about custody and being a custodian. And so, Jeff, would love for you to just walk through the difference between the two, how to think about that within the context of an IRA, and of course, how Bitcoin relates to this conversation.
You got it. So IRAs so Section 408 of the Internal Revenue Code is the actual section that authorizes creation of IRAs. And one of the very first sections of 408 says that all IRAs must have a custodian, and that custodian must be a licensed financial institution. So basically, by licensed financial institution, what we're saying is, for the most part, a bank or a trust company. So that's sort of interesting in terms of what that means. When the statute was first written back in the 1970s, typically what that meant was you went to the bank, you got an IRA, and it was either like a CD that earned a fixed interest rate, or it was some other financial institution that was like choosing your investments for you. It was, for lack of a better term, very, very custodial, right? You didn't have a whole lot of control over your IRA other than selecting who that custodian was. That hasn't been the case for a while. Those kind of IRAs aren't even really around anymore. Nowadays, forget about Bitcoin for a minute. Even if you open up a pretty standard IRA with Charles Schwab, TD Ameritrade, whoever, the custodian isn't doing that kind of stuff. Your account agreement with the custodian basically says that all the custodian is doing is holding what we legally call bare legal title, or sometimes is also called more provocatively naked title to your IRA assets. And what that means is they're willing to put their name on a piece of paper saying that they're the owner or custodian of those assets, but that's it. They turn them over to you upon request, effectively no questions asked. All you have to do is ask. They don't get involved in your investments. You tell them how it's going to be invested. They just execute those instructions, and they're not responsible for basically anything. That's typically what the custodial requirement has come to mean over the past, I feel really old now. The 70s were like 50 years ago. That's a scary thought for me. Anyway, that's how things have evolved, right? Now, in the context of what that actually means, we got a really funky case on point last November, almost exactly a year ago, that was McNulty versus Commissioner. These custodial requirements, because they had become so almost meaningless over that 50-year period, I can't recall a tax law case really ever getting into them at all. Like the idea was like, as long as there was some sort of nominal custodianship that fulfilled the requirement of the statute. Because what the IRS was really looking for from that custodian was monitoring. They wanted to make sure there was no tax abuse. There was somebody constantly watching it, even if they weren't controlling it, they were watching it so that everything would be reported to the IRS if someone made a prohibited transaction, if they made a withdrawal out of their IRA, all those sorts of things. That was really the crux of it. McNulty was a very unusual case, and it involved a woman who had gold within her IRA. Now, gold within an IRA has its own set of rules that apply only to precious metals. There's a very specific statute on that. Those rules don't apply to Bitcoin. So what the court could have done in the McNulty case is just said, hey, this woman didn't follow the gold rules. She's out of luck. She loses this case. But it did this really weird thing where it, in passing, mentioned the very obvious fact that she wasn't following the rules under 408M, which, dictate those special rules that are applicable to precious metals. And it went on and it did an analysis of 408A2, which are the rules around custody. And it came up with this concept that in order for there to be property custody of an IRA, you couldn't have what's called constructive receipt. And that's a very interesting phrasing there, because constructive receipt is a very old concept in the tax code. Well, I should say in tax law. If you go back in the case law relating to income tax, there's lots and lots of cases over the past 100 years that revolve around this idea of constructive receipt. It had never been applied to IRA withdrawals before. With good reason, because the way constructive receipt is defined in the case law generally outside of the IRA context, anytime you have a contractual agreement with somebody that they will hand over money or some other property to you on demand, that's as good as if you have it in your own possession already. If that standard was applied to IRAs, every modern IRA would be non-compliant, right? Because everybody's account agreement with every plain vanilla brokerage says, when you want to make a withdrawal, you let us know when we make the withdrawal, right? I mean, that's how it works. That's how IRAs work. They don't, if you make a withdrawal from your TD Ameritrade IRA, you don't go around poking around to see if you really need the money or anything like that. They give you your money. So that's not what it means. So we had to really dig into the tea leaves of that case and figure out what do they mean. And I wrote a whole article about this on the McNulty case, sort of, tearing that case apart and analyzing it, which we'll post a link to that. You can sort of read through, because we developed our Unchained IRA product to be compliant with the rationale of this case. And we did that out of the interest of conservatism, because the rationale of this case is not very good. It's not well reasoned, and arguably it's something called dicta, which in the law means part of a legal opinion that wasn't relevant to the actual holding in the case, and therefore is not precedential. As I said, this case turned on the fact that there were special rules involving gold. All this custodial requirement really had no bearing on the case itself and is arguably dicta. But in order to be extremely conservative, we chose to sort of try to comply with the rationale as best as we possibly could, and as well as, any modern IRA does. And in that spirit, what we did is we designed this such that we're monitoring these IRAs 24/7. So the real fatal flaw of McNulty was that the custodian had no way to know whether Mrs. McNulty had moved her gold, spent it, sold it, what she was doing with it, because it was just sitting in a safe in her house. With an Unchained IRA, we even though we may not have a quorum of keys to be able to, take your Bitcoin away from you, we do have, your wallet configuration, and everything is public on the Bitcoin blockchain. So we're able to monitor if you're making a withdrawal from your IRA so that can be reported appropriately. So, that's why we believe that absent an act of Congress that changed the law entirely, which would be very difficult to do. It's hard to get Congress to act on anything. We believe that we're as compliant as, any other modern styled IRA. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Connor for a little bit here to speak about the Unchained IRA more specifically.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Jeff, and I appreciate you walking through that. I think you stole some of the thunder on this next slide here in terms of how the IRA works, but that's definitely for the best because once again, I don't think anyone can explain this stuff as good as you. Before we jump too deep into the Unchained IRA, though, I do just want to take a moment to talk through what Unchained Capital does more broadly for anyone that may not be aware, because at the end of the day, the IRA product is one small part of what we do here at Unchained Capital. So Unchained Capital is a Bitcoin native financial services company. And the core mission of our company is to empower individuals to hold their own private keys to their Bitcoin. And more specifically, we help individuals build what's called a 2 of 3 multi-signature address, meaning there are 3 private keys associated with the Bitcoin address on our platform. And as the client, you hold 2 in the form of these hardware wallets like a Trezor or a Ledger. And Unchained holds the 3rd. And so the analogy I like to use, you can kind of think about it like a digital safety deposit box that has 2 keyholes, 3 unique keys, and you need any combination of 2 of those 3 keys in order to open that vault and access the Bitcoin. We only hold 1 key in that arrangement. And so at no point does Unchained Capital have access to your Bitcoin or can prevent you from accessing your Bitcoin because you have 2 keys. You have unilateral access to the Bitcoin, whether we provide our key or not. But importantly, if at any point one of the 2 keys that you hold is compromised or lost, your Bitcoin isn't gone forever. We can help you recover that Bitcoin using our 3rd key. The end result of this security setup is what we call collaborative custody, and is what we believe here at Unchained to be the best way, hands down, for you to secure your Bitcoin for the long term, whether it's IRA Bitcoin or otherwise. You really get to have your cake and eat it too, because you're still the only person in the world that has access to the Bitcoin, which is the whole value of one holding one's private keys, but you're not on an island. You have someone sharing that responsibility of holding the keys with you. You have an entire team that's here to support you and answer any questions you may have. And we even have a concierge onboarding service that you can use to sign up, where you can sign up and we'll teach you how to go through this process and set up your devices and hold your own private keys. Every address on our platform is built this way. And our platform is designed to be a one-stop shop for all of your Bitcoin related financial services needs, where with the same 2 keys, you can build an address for your personal Bitcoin. You could also build a separate address, even using the same 2 devices, for a business or a trust that owns Bitcoin. And of course, you can set up an IRA as well through our Unchained IRA, and not only have real Bitcoin in an IRA, but actually hold the keys to that Bitcoin. It really is a one-of-a-kind solution. So a quick run through of the Unchained IRA. You can set up traditional Roth and SEP IRAs at Unchained Capital in this collaborative custody structure. And as Jeff said, every IRA needs a custodian, and Solera National Bank is our IRA financial services partner. They are the ones that are setting up the IRA behind the scenes, and then they actually delegate that key control out to Unchained Capital. And through Unchained Capital, you're holding 2 of those 3 keys. So the way that works is that the IRA is set up at Solera National Bank. The key control is delegated out to Unchained Capital in the form of this 2 of 3 structure. And then we title your IRA vault, which is what we call these 2 of 3 addresses on our platform. We title that IRA vault to that IRA account that we've established for you. Once you have all of that set up, your IRA account, your IRA vault, you can then transfer over funds from an existing IRA or an old 401k. We take those dollars, convert them into Bitcoin, and deposit them into one of these 2 of 3 addresses. As Jeff said, really crucially here, even though we don't have access to the Bitcoin, we do have that third key. We have the wallet configuration file for the address, and that is what allows us to actively monitor the inflows and outflows of that address, and therefore the inflows and outflows of the IRA. And that's how we are able to provide tax reporting and monitoring for IRS compliance purposes, really no different than you would set up at an at a legacy financial service provider that you may have an IRA at. So a quick diagram here. There's a lot going on, but this is just a really good visual in terms of what that looks like. You have the existing IRA or an old 401k custodian on the left. You can see the money is sent, the tax advantage dollars are sent to an IRA custodial account. We take those dollars, convert them into Bitcoin through the Unchained trading desk, and then deposit them into an IRA vault that you hold 2 of the 3 keys to. It's a one-of-a-kind solution. It is the only solution in the market where you are allowed to have real Bitcoin in an IRA, in a standard IRA account, not something more complex like a checkbook IRA, which is where that McNulty discussion comes in, and still hold the keys to it. One of the questions I do get from clients a lot of the time, though, that I thought would be relevant to discuss during our call today is, what if Unchained or Solera were to go out of business? I have a couple of quick thoughts that I'd like to bring up, and then I'll pass it over to Jeff to dive deeper into those 2 questions. But importantly, I think more broadly, people get this impression that having this structure is wildly different than having your funds at a Fidelity or a Schwab or any other legacy financial partner. Most importantly, though, when you're taking your dollars, you send it over and we convert those dollars into Bitcoin. At any point, you can roll those funds back into a standard IRA at a legacy financial provider or another Bitcoin IRA. You are never locked in to the Unchained IRA. If you ever wanted to take a dollar distribution, or maybe you got hit in the head and you woke up one day and you said, I don't want to own Bitcoin anymore, I want to be back in my Apple stock, you would just communicate that to us that you want to provide, process a US dollar transfer. We convert that Bitcoin back to dollars, send the dollars to your IRA custodian, and then it's back in a legacy financial provider where you could buy stocks and bonds and ETFs. So at any time, you can convert your IRA Bitcoin back to US dollars and either transfer to another IRA provider, process a US dollar withdrawal. You can transfer your Bitcoin to another Bitcoin IRA provider. I challenge you to find a better Bitcoin IRA out there than the Unchained IRA, but if you were to find one, you absolutely have the ability at any time to process an in-kind transfer and send the Bitcoin to your new Bitcoin IRA provider. And even in a scenario where you think the world is ending or the sky is falling, it's really important to remember here that you are the only person in the world that controls the Bitcoin. IRA or not, you control the keys from a technical perspective, and you could at any time use your 2 keys to send that Bitcoin to an address of your choosing. Now, importantly, there are potential consequences of doing so, just like there would be consequences of asking a legacy financial provider to send you your IRA funds to a personal bank account. The onus is on you to manage that tax liability. Same exact thing here. But importantly, the question I get is like, if there was a government crackdown for Bitcoin and they froze IRA accounts or whatever it may be, you hold the keys. You ultimately have the option of what you want to do with it. And it's our opinion that it's better for you to have that option and never use it than not have the option at all. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jeff, and we'll take a quick look into these two questions. What if Unchained or Solera went out of business?
Thanks, Connor. Yeah, so if Unchained Capital were to go out of business, there would likely be a wind down period where you'd be allowed to transfer your IRA to another IRA custodian. We wouldn't want to just shut down overnight and leave everyone out in the cold for a whole variety of reasons. But even if that worst case scenario were to happen, and for some reason we did just shut down overnight, Solera National Bank would still be operating as your IRA custodian. So your IRA would remain in good standing. The actual IRA account itself. And in terms of recovering your Bitcoin, there's a variety of open source tools out there, one of which is Caravan, something that, Unchained is responsible for putting out into the ecosystem that would still allow you to access that Bitcoin. If Solera National Bank went out of business, we'd find a new IRA custodian to replace Solera, and we would support the ongoing management of your IRA through that new licensed financial institution. It's also important to keep in mind that Solera is FDIC regulated, and part of being FDIC regulated is FDIC regulated institutions can't just shut down and disappear. They have a very specific government-run wind down process. They have to at all times have, for lack of a better term, contingency plans on file with the FDIC as to what would happen, if they went under, who would take over, how that would all work, how the FDIC is able to step in and wind them down. So you're in pretty good situation there in terms of, Solera National Bank not just disappearing overnight.
Yeah. So once again, I think people understandably think that a solution like the Unchained IRA is wildly different than what they may be currently invested in. But at the end of the day, it really is no different than an IRA that you would set up at a legacy financial provider. It's just on the back end, we're taking your tax advantage dollars and converting them into Bitcoin as opposed to Apple stock or the S&P 500 ETF. And in the same way that, these questions, it would be the same question if you would apply it to any of these. What would happen if these legacy financial providers were to ever go out of business? Same exact thing. There would be certain contingencies put in place to allow you to maintain the good status of your IRA. So with that, Jeff, maybe you can bring it home here with the short answer.
Sure. So the short answer about Bitcoin IRAs being legal is, we feel that the Unchained IRA is as durable as any other type of retirement account under the current law. Depending on your specific circumstances, you can hold many kinds of unconventional investments in an IRA, including real estate, private stock, stock options, and Bitcoin is just one of those. While laws can change, an act of Congress would be required. And then, of course, I have to say that, none of this or anything else that we've talked about here today is any sort of legal or tax advice that's been, tailored to your situation specifically. It's designed to be educational in nature. So if you have questions about your specific circumstance, definitely consult with a tax advisor.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. And with that, it looks like we have reached the end of our discussion today. For anyone who is joining the discussion live, please stay on. As always, we will have a Q&A session at the end here where Jeff will be able to answer your questions directly. For everyone else, thank you so much for joining us for our conversation today. We really appreciate your interest in Unchained Capital and the Unchained IRA. If you are interested in learning more, you can go to unchained.com/IRA. to learn more about the Unchained IRA product or to set up time to speak with our team. And also, if you're interested in learning more broadly about the Unchained Capital platform, once again, the IRA is one small part of what we do. We can help you secure your Bitcoin in this collaborative custody structure for your personal Bitcoin, for Bitcoin owned on behalf of a business or a trust. We have a trading desk where you can buy Bitcoin and have it reach final settlement in an address that you control the keys to quicker than anywhere else in the market. We have Bitcoin-backed loans as well. We are truly trying to provide you with a service that allows you to still be your own bank, which is the beauty of Bitcoin, but still get all of the services that you would expect to have at a bank. So you get to have your cake and eat it too. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. The Retirement Inheritance webinar series will be back next month. We are on the third Wednesday of every month, and we appreciate your interest in our platform. For anyone who is on the live audience, hang on for just a minute and we will get the Q&A going.